Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. Today's episode is a profoundly meaningful one as we reflect on the Shoah, the Holocaust. The Holocaust is not just history, it is personal. It is the story of survival and resilience, of darkness and of light, of unimaginable cruelty and extraordinary courage. For me, it is also deeply personal. As you may know, all four of my grandparents survived the Shoah. My maternal grandfather, Murray Pantier, may his memory be a blessing, the only surviving member of his immediate family, was saved by the now famous Oskar Schindler. In fact, one of my daughter Caroline's Hebrew names is Amalia, after the first factory where Oskar Schindler began to help and save Jewish lives during the Holocaust. The factory, Deutsche Malwaren Fabrik, was known by the survivors as Amalia, which in Hebrew means work of God. When our family visits Yad Vashem in Israel, we always bring Caroline to take a photo in front of Oskar and Emily Schindler's tree. I am alive, and she is alive because of Oskar Schindler, as well as the angel who put my grandfather's name on the now famous Schindler's List. Though Oskar Schindler may be one of the most famous of the righteous Gentiles who saved the lives of Jews during the Holocaust, Yad Vashem today recognizes 28,217 righteous among the nations from 51 different countries. Over the next hour, I have the privilege of speaking with two guests whose family stories are also marked by heroism in the face of horror and by the only righteous among the nations from the country of Japan. Joining me is Chihiro Sugihara, grandson of Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese diplomat who risked everything to save thousands of Jewish lives by issuing transit visas, allowing them to escape the Nazis, risking his career and the lives of his family. Chihiro served for 12 years as the chairman of the nonprofit organization Chiune Sugihara Visas for Life and travels the world sharing his grandfather's story. And with us as well is Rabbi Avram Mlotek, whose own grandfather, Yosl Mlotek, and great-uncle, whose name was Abram Mlotek, were among the many saved by Sugihara's bravery. Avram is also a cantor, licensed social worker, Jewish outreach innovator, and acclaimed author. He is the co-creator and librettist of Amid Falling Walls, a musical featuring Yiddish songs written during the Holocaust, which had its world premiere at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, in fall of 2023, and which won the 2024 Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Revue. He is also one of my chavrutas, my study partners, in both Torah and in life. Together, we'll explore these family stories, the weight of memory, and what it means to carry forward the legacy of those who stood up against evil. What lessons can we draw from their choices? How does their bravery shape our responsibility today? I'm so honored to have you both here. Let's begin. Chihiro, let's start from the beginning. I remember seeing the documentary about your grandfather when I was in high school and learning a bit of the story, but he's your grandfather. He's not a person in a documentary. Tell me a little bit about who he was before the Holocaust and his story as it led up to the Holocaust.
Okay. My grandfather, he born 1900 January, up country in small town.
Okay.
But his father used to work in government officer. He was government officer. He used to work in the revenue department. So moving many places. And so my grandfather grew up at Nagoya, where the Japanese automobile company came, Toyota.
Okay.
That place, and he grew up. And he was quite smart. He made top rank in high school. So his father wanted him to be the medical doctor.
Okay.
So by order, my grandfather went to the examination for the medical school.
By order of his father.
Right.
His father said,
His
"You're
father-
smart.
Yeah,
You're going to go be a doctor."
Right, yeah, but
Sounds very similar to a Jewish story already. Okay.
but he failed
Oh, on purpose?
on purpose.
No, really?
Yes,
Really?
yes. But his father wondered how my son failed
Sure.
entrance examination. And his father went school to ask what happened.
Yeah.
And then the teacher shows, your son wrote down only your name, only his name,
Oh.
and the blank.
Wow. He wrote his own name or his father's name?
His name.
His own name. And he didn't write anything?
Nothing.
Wow. He really didn't want to be a doctor.
Because he wants to be the English teacher.
Uh,
So his father was very upset,
Yeah.
and he was kicked out.
Wow.
So and then he went to Tokyo
Okay.
and entered the university and majored in English.
Okay.
But it was very difficult without support from the parents. So always he has a shortage of the money and not easy, but he taken many jobs to support his life. And one day he found the announcement from the foreign ministry who wished to study in the abroad. So he jumped, he got the offer, and then he passed the examination, and he entered the foreign ministry.
Got it. Because he studied English, so it helped him for foreign ministry.
Right,
Okay.
right. And then the government sent him to the north of the China. It's called Manchuria,
Okay.
Alpine,
Okay.
and to study the Russian.
Got it.
So, and then there is a Japanese institute teach the Russian
Okay.
for the Japanese student, and they got the sleep principle, which is very important for his life. It's like don't rely on others,
Okay.
help someone if they are in trouble, and don't ask return. This is
Beautiful.
the sleep principle that institute taught them.
The Japanese Institute.
Right.
So don't rely on others, help others, and don't ask for anything in return. Okay.
So, and then after that, he became the #1 Russian speaker, and he entered the foreign ministry in Manchuria. Manchuria is under control by the Japanese government. And then he became the young diplomat, and he was served over there about 15 to 16 years. He became the vice ministry of foreign affairs and purchased the Russian railway.
Got it.
Siberian
Wow.
railway, yeah.
So he's speaking Japanese, English, and Russian.
Russian, and he speaks 7 languages:
Okay.
German and French, and I don't remember. But anyway, he speaks 7 languages. And then when he purchased the railway from the Soviet Union, he has his network. He used the local people to collect the informations, like how many trains, how many people working, how much salary, this and that. And he negotiated with the Soviet Union government, and he purchased 1/3 from the offer.
He purchased what? Sorry?
1/3 the price.
Oh, got it. Okay. Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah, so he
He was
negotiated.
good at business. 1/3 of the price. Okay.
1/3 the price.
Wow.
And then after that, he was sent back to Japan, and then Japanese government wanted to send him to the Moscow because he speaks perfect Russian. But Soviet Union refused him. They remember what happened in the Manchuria and the railway.
Oh.
So the government negotiated to get his visa for 1 year, but never success.
Wow.
And then he became a persona non grata.
Okay. In the Soviet Union.
Soviet Union.
Got it. All that Russian.
Right.
Now he can't go to
right.
Russia.
Yeah, they remember.
Because he did one good deal, but everyone remembered. They didn't want to lose twice. Got
Right.
it.
So, and then the government sent him to the Helsinki,
Okay.
Finland. And after that, he was transferred to the Lithuania to collect the information. Because at that time, before the war, our government need to have a clear, collect the information. So then sent 5 young diplomats to Europe, and he was one of them.
Got it. And the idea was he was stationed in Lithuania to collect information about what?
About he was watching the German army.
Got it.
And the
So like a
Russian
spy
army,
almost.
spy, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then his mission to create the network in the Europe.
Got it. And this was already, he got sent to Lithuania after the World War II started? Or before?
No, before the war. It was 1940, 1939.
Oh, got it. So it hadn't quite got there yet. Okay, fine. Got it. Okay, fine. All right, we're going to pause. I'm going to go to Avram now. We're going to go back and forth. Avram, you tell me, what do you know about your grandfather's life up until the war?
I first have to say just what a privilege it is, an honor to sit with you, and thank you to Justin for convening this conversation.
And I'll say thank you to our good friends Saul and Ben Goldberg also for helping to convene this conversation as well.
It's in our home growing up, the name Sugihara was legend, so and we were all aware of the enormous sacrifice.
And you guys are meeting for the first time.
Yes.
On television now.
Yes.
Very special.
My Zeta grandfather in Yiddish was he was a gentleman. He was a poet and a writer. He grew up in a shtetl, a small village outside of Warsaw called Pruszewicz. He was one of 8 children. His father taught Limudei Kodesh, Judaic studies. If I showed you a picture of him, you would see like just an ultra-Orthodox looking Jew, but he also taught mathematics and Polish and German. And his mom oversaw the family sewing business. And the kids were, the array of, they were Bundist and socialists and communists, and for me, I try to imagine, what the sounded like at their Shabbos table, the weekly gathering space. What
do you imagine?
I don't know, probably a lot of yelling, but it's just the fact that they were all able to be there together around the same table, despite their religiousness maybe in politics or religious adherence. My grandfather was not a religious man, even though he came from a religious home.
Interesting.
And
how does that work? I feel like, how do you become you have 2 rebels here, I guess, right? Your grandfather didn't want to go to medical school despite what his father said, and your grandfather didn't want to be religious despite a religious father.
I wish I had the opportunity to ask him. In Yiddish there are 2 terms, frum, which means religious, or frei, which is free. And that was, reflected in their thinking and openness to the world. And I guess, my great-grandfather, Zalman Mlotek, my Zeta's father, was religious but also a free thinker in his own way and welcomed, I guess, a diversity of thought. My grandfather, even though he was not a religious man, after the war, was always very welcoming and inclusive towards traditionalism and the like, but I don't know how he
expressed that. I mean, I remember my grandmother telling me that there was one day someone in her village in Europe went to buy an ice cream on Shabbat.
Yeah.
And that was the way of rebelling, because it's not like you were finding groups online. It's a different era to rebel in that way. It was a little bit different. All right. Well, we'll have to solve that mystery a different day, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, how was he spending his time before the war? How old was he? When was he born? Do you know?
He was born in, I think, 1918.
Okay.
So, I could be mistaken. Oh, he was 21 when the war broke out.
Yeah, so that's right.
Is that right?
Good math.
Thanks. But he was a poet. He was involved in youth organizations like the Medem Sanatorium was this school and camp-like environment for youngsters who were suffering from tuberculosis, and he was a student leader there, and he would lead Yiddish cultural gatherings, and he was a writer, and he was already gaining some prominence for his writing. So when
fiction or
poetry and some journalism, and he was a young man. He was practically a teenager, but he left the home at 21 when the war broke out, and he was working for a newspaper called the Volkszeitung at the time, the People's newspaper.
Fine.
And the idea was to collect refugee testimonies. And so they were going to travel to Lublin, but they learned along the way that Lublin was blockaded, so they made their way to Vilna, And once they got to Vilna, learned that the editors and renowned Yiddish writers were being arrested. So he went into hiding there, and it was there in hiding that he learned through a friend that one of his brothers had escaped, and the friend had convened their
He was one of 8.
meeting. He was one of 8. He didn't know who it was until he opened the door and saw his brother Avram, after whom named, and together they traveled to Kovno, which is where Sugihara was stationed, and I don't know how they learned of the signing of visas, but they waited in line for days. Apparently, they were of some of the last beneficiaries of that before the Japanese government recalled Sugihara for the traitorous act of saving Jews.
All right, we're going to pause there. We're going to go back to you now, and feel free if you have questions of each other. But so, you're where we left off. We heard a little bit of one person's story. Where we left off, the war was starting to break out. Your grandfather was stationed in Lithuania, in Kovno. Is that what we're saying?
Right,
Yeah?
yes.
So what happened? What do you know from the story? What happened during... Tell us the story.
It's just before the war.
Okay.
And the Russian, Soviet Union, and German invaded Poland, and then they divided 2 countries.
Mm-hmm.
And then Poland disappeared from the map. And Japan, German, and Italy, we have a tripartite pact. So we cooperate each other at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why many refugees came down from Lithuania to Lithuania, Poland to Lithuania.
Mm-hmm.
Asked the visas. I believe that they knock on the many embassies door,
Okay.
but most of embassy closed their doors except Japan and then Holland, Dutch.
Okay.
So
People were trying to get out of Lithuania to go
right.
to safety somewhere.
Right.
Jews. Okay.
So my grandfather asked his government if he can issue the visas because the large number of the people came to his consulate.
Right.
So he can issue maybe 5 or 10 visas, but he need to get permission because 1,000 people in front of his
And
office.
they wanted visas to go to Japan?
Go to Japan, go through the Japan because my grandfather can issue only transit visa, but to issue the transit visa, they need to have final destinations.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So it was through Japan to go somewhere else,
Right.
America or Israel or something.
Mm.
Okay, and so do you know people started knocking on his door and he said, "I need to help these people," or what happened?
What happened? Because the Dutch consul has an idea. He can stamp. Curacao is somewhere in the island,
Okay.
and there is no officers over there.
Okay.
It's kind of the colony.
Okay.
And then they can stamp the Curacao visas. So who has a Curacao visa? My grandfather can issue the transit visas. But this Dutch consul was left before my grandfather. So after that, my grandfather just stamp whatever, who never have final destinations.
Got it. And what was the risk involved? Japan didn't want him to do that because of the war? Because he felt like it was going against the Germans to help the Jews.
Right.
And he was undermining that. And then did his superiors in Japan know what he was doing? What happened?
What happened? Okay, he asked the permission, but the government said no. But at the time, there is no internet, right? So send a telegram to go and then come back will take time.
Sure.
So he used this trick. He sent, maybe you don't understand what happened situation here. So many people ask if we don't give the visas, they're in trouble. We must do something. And then after that, he received the visa, and then he prayed I didn't see your message, something like that. Then this time, he issue the visas. So about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, he wrote 2,100. 130 as in the record. And after that 2,130, he stopped to take the record because waste of time, and he stopped to collect money. He just stamp.
Wow.
So, and then he estimated about 4,000 to 5,000 visas he issued.
Right.
Include Mira Yeshiva students.
Right.
He saved all 300 children.
Wow. My gosh. And how long did all this happen in? How long was the period of time when he started stamping until stopped stamping?
I think 28 days.
In 28 days.
Right.
He was just, wow. And you mentioned the Mir Yeshiva we were discussing earlier. The Mir Yeshiva, which today is a famous yeshiva in Israel. One of the rabbis of the 21st century that I learned the most from, who I never had a chance to meet, was Rabbi Shlomo Volbe, who was what's called the Mashkiach Ruchani, the director of spirituality, I guess, of souls at the Mir Yeshiva. So another way that we're connected here. So he, over 28 days, kind of just like, I don't care that these telegrams are not coming back. I'm just going to do this. I'll find out later if I'm in trouble, basically.
Right.
He must have known what he was doing at that point.
Right, and then at the time, I'm sorry, but anyway, I issue the visas.
Right.
Then, because he want to be sure his visa must work.
Yeah.
So the government said, okay, you cannot issue anymore. I said, okay, I'm not going to anymore. Something like this to be the to work, this visa work for them.
Got it.
And then Soviet Union invaded Lithuania, and then they offered my grandfather to close the office. And then he moved to Berlin. Before he moved to Berlin, he closed his office, moved to the hotel to take rest because he suffered so much. He's very tired.
Yeah.
And he
Still signing.
signed.
Right.
And then he moved to hotel, and still someone knocked on the door.
Wow.
And then they
Still
ordered,
signing.
signed,
Still
the
stamping.
sign, still
And
signed.
people went to Berlin and they found him. They got visas there.
Right. Before he pulled out to the Berlin, he went to the station to take the train, and then still he give the visa from the train windows until the
Every minute, it's a life saved.
Right.
Everything he could do. Unbelievable. Wow. And there were people, I assume, for those 28 days, once people heard, there was lines around the corner.
I was in Vilna a few years ago to officiate a wedding, students of mine, and because I was so close to Kovno, I decided to take I think we took a car to get there, and as I'm there, I was wondering how he traveled that journey. I mean, eventually from Kovno to Japan, and there was another city, and then Japan, an event before we get to Shanghai. But by the time he got there, there was like a whole city and gathering outside of the consulate.
By the time your grandfather got there.
By the time my grandfather got there, of people just encampments and waiting to get an audience with Sugihara.
Wow. Amazing. And you mentioned 4,000 or 5,000. I saw online someone said 6,000. And again, each of those visas is the family, right? It's one person and their family.
Right.
Right. So it's many more people were saved because it's not that it's about the numbers, but each of those people, it's their family. What were we going to say?
I was just going to say, I'm so moved listening to being here and listening to you, but I'm thinking of the Talmudic teaching that you save a life, you save a world, and I'm thinking of this man who is retreated now to his the hotel room as his arm is physically weary, and yet is still being knocked at the door, and still is offering these life jackets, right? What it must have been like to encounter all of those souls, each individual, and to be aware that he was in fact giving them a chance at life. It's just.
And did he ever share reflections of that time? What his thoughts were or his emotions with you as a grandchild, or did he write it at all, or what did he say?
This is story how I know.
Okay.
When I was 14 years old,
Okay.
He ordered me to come to his office, and there's papers, and then he told me to copy this. It was his memoir. What he mentioned what happened in Lithuania.
Wow.
And his Japanese is terrible. I cannot read, and very old type of
He only knows English, Russian, German. Doesn't have time for Japanese. Yeah.
But very difficult to read.
Yeah.
And then I don't understand many meanings.
Yeah.
So sentence by sentence, ask my grandfather.
Wow.
This how I studied, how I learned the story.
Wow. And you didn't know it before that? Or you knew a little bit?
I heard from my grandmother, but at the time, many years he was working in the abroad. So sometime, he came back to Japan only summer and then the winter for the vacation.
After the war?
After the war, he got a job in Moscow.
In Moscow. They took him back?
He was he became as a businessman.
Wow. So tell me, do you know about that? What was that transition like? So he spent 28 days saving as many Jewish people as possible, and then he got sent to Berlin. He was there till the end of the war, or he came back home at some point?
No, after the Berlin, the government moved him to the Königsberg.
Okay, Königsberg, yeah, sure.
Königsberg, but it was under control by the German.
Okay.
And then that German general doesn't like my grandfather because so
people knew.
Right. So and then he was transferred to the Romania. I don't know what happened in the Romania, but I think Romania was laid down because of the oil.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know the details, and then he was there until end of the war.
Got it.
At end of the war, he was kept in the concentration camp in the Siberia for 1.5 years.
Got it, because he was Japanese. Got it. He was like
war crimes.
War crimes.
Right. I mean, every 3 months he was moving to the many concentrated camp to ask the question from the Soviet Union.
They were asking him questions.
Asking the questions.
Because they want to know. And he said, "You should let me free. I was helping people. I wasn't on the war effort." But
I don't know. He never spoken about this one, and maybe he has.
I wonder if that was very difficult for him. Also, the irony of that, also, that he's sitting there saving people's lives during the war, and then he's being treated like a war criminal after the war.
Right.
Wow.
So after the 1.5 years, he was luckily to came back to Japan, and he went to his office, and he lost the job.
They fired him.
They fired because of he disobeyed the order.
Insubordination, as they say. Wow. What was the reaction? So that no one was proud of what he did in Japan in the beginning.
I don't know exactly, but at the time it's 1940s. The order is order. It's imperial Japanese government. It's very strict, and he against anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why he got fired.
Wow. Wow. You have a question?
I would say it's a meta comment. I don't know if it's...
okay.
I was just thinking there's, at the root of I'm listening to your grandfather's story, and from disobeying his father to go to medical school, or even breaking away from tradition, and I'm thinking of the order is the order, and disobeying war commands. He was saving people. I mean, the people were Jews who were who were slaughtered. Of course, that there's a time of breaking the rules, of breaking the order that is ultimately necessary to uphold humanity, to uphold a certain type of vision, but it requires it's at a significant cost.
It's real courage and real honor.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, but he did, over time, he made his way back into the government, you said?
No, I mean, he
became a businessman, you said.
He became a businessman, yeah. But in the beginning, it was very difficult because after the war, not much job available.
Sure.
So he did everything to even make the 1 penny. First, he bought a light bulb because the life is so short.
Okay.
And he bought many,
and
they started selling the light, but he never success.
Okay.
So something like that, and then he became a translator.
Got it. Oh, he used the language.
Right.
Got it.
And finally he got a job in Moscow.
doing translation work?
No, I mean he became he used to work in the trading company, Japanese trading company, and then this company sent him to the Moscow.
Got it. Wow. Crazy. And then was there a moment that, how was he received in Japan? At a certain point, did people feel differently? Would they recognize that he was a hero? How did that?
Because he never spoken about it.
He didn't speak about it?
Never.
Wow.
Never. So he was not sure if his visa worked, but it's 19.
He didn't know if his visas worked.
I mean,
he gave out the visas, but he didn't see the people.
He
He just said,
didn't
I
see
hope
the
they're
people.
okay wherever
Right,
they
yeah.
are.
And then
Wow.
1968,
1968.
he got the phone call from the Israel embassy.
Wow.
At the time, he saved so many people. There were five leaders. One of the leaders became the diplomat. They came to Japan to looking for my grandfather.
Wow.
And then first he went to the foreign ministry, Japanese foreign ministry, asked Sugihara. And the foreign ministry said, there is no Sugihara.
Wow.
And then he realized that they received the visa, not from, my grandfather issued the visas from his personal, decision, not the government decision.
Oh, you're saying the visas that he issued were not, they were like
In
personal visas.
yeah, in the beginning, the many refugees understand Japanese government save us.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
They went to Japan. They lived in Japan for a year until they.
Yeah, what happened? Finish the story. You told us your grandfather and great uncle, they got a visa.
They got a visa at Königsberg. I forget which town they went to along the way, but eventually made their way to Kobe, Japan, and they lived.
That's what the visas got them to Kobe, Japan.
Right.
And they got there during the war?
During the war. This is all
Okay.
during the war. They had no idea what was happening to their family back home in Warsaw. They lived there for a year, along with this Jewish community that Sugihara had saved until
A lot of them that were there.
A lot of them that were there until they realized or learned that the Japanese government was no longer going to house them, and then, but that this a ghetto had been formed in China. I don't quite understand the political arrangement, but. And that's where those Jews that Sugihara saved eventually spent the war years, which was in China, in Shanghai.
They left Kobe
in a ghetto in Shanghai.
In Shanghai.
And there was a vibrant Jewish community there, as wherever there are Jews, there was
Wow.
community. They had synagogues and schools and cultural centers and libraries. My grandfather was involved in those environments, but yeah.
They were safe there. And
They
then
were
what
s-
happened when the war ended?
It was only there that they learned, frankly, what had transpired to besides my grandfather's brother, Avram, after whom I'm named, who he spent the war years with. There was one other sister who survived, spent the war years, and escaped to Siberia, and they had sent letters back and forth. And it was only then that they learned, of the slaughter of Eastern Europe.
And where did they go from there? They made their way to America or to Israel?
Eventually North America, Canada, and
They had to get new
Israel.
visas, or they were
yeah,
able to.
to get to North. There's actually a pope.
Sorry, all right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, but to their knowledge, it was Japan. The country of Japan helped them also. They didn't think of it as Sugihara. They thought it was.
It was known. It was known
They knew.
that was Sugi. Yeah.
Even back then.
How could you not?
Yeah.
I mean, Japan was part of the.
Right. What Chihiro
Axis.
said, maybe not all of them knew that it was. Okay. Interesting. All right. And so and you wanted to share something?
Well, it just it's of that time, of that that period of living in Shanghai and not quite knowing what was. What had transpired back home, and living in this in a sojourner's kind of way. My grandfather was a poet. This is a poem that he wrote. I wanted to share. It's called "The Lament of My Mother" that he wrote in.
This is when he was in the ghetto in Shanghai.
Correct.
Okay. He knew his mother had passed already by then, or no?
It's unclear if he knew at this time.
Okay.
Okay. Through oceans and countries, through closures and walls, I see my mother's cracked hands. I hear my mother's sobs and laments. Where are my children? Lost and alone. I hear her sobs. I'm aware of her grief, and each painful tear like a stone on my path. My foolish heart races back toward home. The heart knows no borders or artificial fences. The heart knows no structures protected by guards. Break down the gate, I'm at her door. I meet my mother already old with gray hair. She hugs me a caress and says, "Flown away, flown afar like birds in autumn. Tell my children my life to that land. Only yesterday have I rocked your cradle singing songs for you about golden happiness." Excuse me. Today you flew away like leaves in the wind. Already you're homesick. Is it the truth, my child? Good, at least you've returned to my dreams, my longing, my golden happiness. Together I was with my mother, no longer solitary, no longer alone. I feel every tear that drops on me like a blow. Only at mother's side is it good. Good, so good. Wow. It's called the Lament of My Mother. It may have been written shortly after he reached China, or along the way to Shanghai.
Yiddish originally?
In Yiddish originally, yeah.
Got it. Talk to me how that speaks to you.
Well, my grandfather rarely spoke of his wartime experiences, of leaving his family and of losing his family, nieces and nephews, and that world. But in his life after the war, was devoted very much to the culture that was nearly decimated, and so this poem doesn't speak of anything particularly Jewish or Yiddish oriented, but it's the humanity, right, of a mother, of longing for a mother and a mother's not knowing. And he's but one of the thousands of people who are longing for their mother, or whose mother is longing for him, who Sugihara ultimately saved. Just that yearning for home from a place of such homelessness.
Right.
Wow,
right. And of course, we're so grateful that Sugihara saved all these people. There's this other element here of them losing their parents and losing their siblings and being sent away, which was to safety ultimately. But they're by themselves.
Right.
He had his brother.
Exactly.
But he was separated. Wow. Got it. And then and just say a few more words about, you mentioned your grandfather was committed to preserving the tradition afterwards. How did your grandfather live out his life after the war?
My grandfather was a tuer in Yiddish, which means a doer. He made things happen. He was the editor of the Yiddish Forward. Together with my grandmother, Chiune Mlotek, who he called, the Warschauer Mädel from the Bronx, the Warsaw girl from the Bronx, compiled anthologies of Yiddish music. They had a column in their newspaper where they would invite readers, before internet and Facebook, where they would invite readers to send in snippets of songs that they remembered from before the war. And my father describes their home being inundated with letters and cassettes and tapes of people wanting to represent their shtetl and represent their home. So my grandfather helped compile those collections, but he was also he would continue to be a poet and a writer, and worked as the education director through the Abatering, the Work and Circle, as it was known, developing Yiddish curriculum, and produced concerts and events, and was really at the heart of Yiddish culture. The Nobel laureate Basheva Singer called them the Sherlock Holmes of Yiddish song, because they were so committed to saving that body of work.
Beautiful. And did he speak? How did he speak about Chiune Sugihara? Do you have memories of him talking about it, or he told your father?
I learned about Chiune Sugihara through my father and uncle and grandmother. My grandfather was already getting old and a bit frail, but he came to my bar mitzvah, and my grandfather, he was hospitalized, but he had the ambulance park the car away from the entrance to the shul, and then had him wheel him in because he didn't want to bring the car into the shul parking lot on Shabbos. No, it was simply known. On one of the book mantles, I remember seeing it was prominently placed a picture of my grandfather with I guess your grandmother, Sugihara's wife, who we met.
Wow.
You know, but so it was just known.
It was just a presence in your family.
Yeah.
Wow. It was like he was a hero.
He was a hero.
Obviously. You were alive because of him.
We all were aware of that. You
Wow.
know, when I went to the now museum in Kovno, I wrote, you know, in the sign-in book, referring to Sugihara, you know, because of his kindness, I live. And it's really true, you know, and it's not just me. It's, you know, my whole family and so many families.
Wow. What's the name of the museum?
In Kovno, I don't know.
There's a Kovno museum.
It's a museum that's now
Used to be that
site.
Yeah, that was the Japanese consul.
Right.
Became the museum.
Beautiful. Okay, and then coming back to where you were before, 1968. So he hadn't been publicly recognized in Japan for the work that he did in general at all. And then he got, in 1968, someone figured it out. Israelis came running to try to find him.
Right.
And they found him. What happened?
After that, and then the news was spread, found Sugihara.
Wow.
Then he became the well-known after that, from the outside, not in Japan.
Not in Japan.
But now many children knows because they study in the school.
Oh, so when they tell the story of World War II, they have
right. So
a shining moment in there. Wow.
Diplomat saved the
Got it.
thousands of the
When you walk
refugees.
into a business meeting today and Japanese people, they hear your name, they ask you, are you related? And
Sometimes because my name, Chihiro, my grandfather, Chiune, some people ask, are you related from this man? And sometimes, it's happened.
Wow. Wow. And then you were saying you were transcribing his memoir for him.
Right.
Right. Was there anything that stood out from that experience for you? Things that you remember that you read for the first time? Did you say you have some of the memoir you wanted to share today?
Right. He had, because he left few memoirs, long one and short one. Today I have a short one.
Okay.
It's translated English.
English,
maybe.
beautiful.
Yeah.
You want to do it?
Okay, my honor.
Wait, tell us, set the scene. Where this is from during the war, or when did he write? Do you know when he?
This is he mentioned. He wrote down what happened in Lithuania. Why?
Beautiful.
He decided to.
Why he did this? Oh, amazing.
It says on the bottom, summer 1978.
Okay, so he wrote this later in his life about his experience.
Right.
On the day I received the initial orders, I thought about it all night. I thought deep and hard. I knew that if I simply relayed the orders to the crowd and followed them as stated, I would be praised by the ministry for my loyalty. If others had been in charge, I'm sure that 100 out of 100 would have refused the visa applications as per the instructions from Tokyo. More than anything, there was a real fear that failure to follow the orders could be grounds for denial of further promotion or outright dismissal for violation of some clauses or other of the official rules of conduct. I admit that I myself agonized over the decision all night after receiving the orders. Would it truly meet our national interest to reject the visa applications on the pretext of insufficient travel documentation, security, or other reasons, earning the eternal resentment of the Jewish people with their worldwide support base, due solely to the whims of a shallow, irresponsible, and reckless military group seeking only to conform with the Nazi alliance? After much struggle and torment, I ultimately reached the conclusion that humanity and compassion come first. I risked my career and duly executed my mission without hesitation. I'm confident even now that I did the right thing.
Avram, how you feeling right now?
What a privilege to read his words. And to sit here, both as grandchildren of our grandfathers, the primary actors and people who experienced it. And each of us, we carry our grandfathers, our parents, our history, our people's stories in so many different ways. But I'm feeling the humanity of Sugihara's words, and also the remarkable calculation, the self-awareness with the calculation of what was at stake, both personally and the vision, frankly, of being able to be mindful of the impact of his simple signature.
Beautiful, and it's amazing. I think also a piece of it is also this idea of loyalty and honor. This value is like it's, you know, I don't know that you hear that. Most of the righteous among the nations is a story of I was hiding someone in my farm. If I got caught, I would die. There's a different thing here, which is like you almost feel like the weight of a civilization in some ways, right? That there's like a Japanese way of doing things where like honor is such an important piece of that, and being loyal is such an important piece of that. That like in some ways that's even almost more important than life in some ways, right? That's you're balancing saving lives with maintaining honor and loyalty. Am I making sense? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The Japanese regime after the war all took their lives.
Right, because they felt like they failed their country.
Right.
Right. It's very different. It's well, and within, you know, Avram and I have spoken before. Our Rabbi Avi Weiss, he talks about how those who survived the Holocaust were kind of the golden generation. Is that the right language, Avi? Am I saying it right, Rabbi Avram?
Yeah.
Right. That there's something special about those people, that they experienced something that no one, you know, unique in history, within your own home and your own family. You know, was your grandfather seen as like this like heroic mountain? I don't know how else to describe it. Like how what were the family that, with respect to your privacy, but I'm asking anyway, you know, what was the dynamic in your family around, you know, your grandfather's work?
My grandfather was just a very good grandfather, and like a grandfather and a grandson. And after the war, he was working he spent many times in abroad, so sometimes he came back, and after he retired, he was in Japan, and time to time he taught me the English, but I was not very serious about it.
You're doing great.
So he was quite nice, and we cleaned together the garden. He never spoken much about it.
To you, he didn't speak about it. The memoirs you did.
Memoirs, and then my grandmother told more.
Wow. Do you, you know, we talk about honor and loyalty. And for me, my grandfather, who was saved by Oskar Schindler, the life that he lived after the war, I don't want to say I feel immense pressure, but I feel the weight of his life, and it creates responsibility for me to do something meaningful with my life. That the very fact that I'm here feels like a gift that could have been gone in a second. My whole life is a gift. Do you feel a sense of obligation or inspiration or something because of who your grandfather was that shapes the way you live your life today?
My life, everything like related, connected, what he did, because I'm working in the jewelry business, diamond business, because of the...
With our friends, the Goldbergs.
Right, yes. I mean, my grandfather had 4 children. My father was the first one. And then my uncle, still he is living in Belgium, and he born after the war in Japan. And then he got a scholarship in the Hebrew University in Tel Aviv because of my grandfather things. And he entered the diamond business, and I follow him.
Wow.
And then this how I'm living.
So it's come full circle in some ways, right?
Right. Still my grandfather helping.
He's helping you from we say from Shemayim, from heaven. from he has an eye on you.
Right, because
he's guiding you in your career.
Right, because before he passed away, and he was very sick, and the other time we took care of it, and I cleaned his face. I wash his hand, and we eat together. And he always said, "Chihiro, don't worry. I will watch you, take care of you until if I'm going there. Don't worry."
Do you believe?
I must believe.
Yes.
I must believe. And then I have a chance to work here in New York. I travel together with my customer.
Sure.
So like I don't see the load in front of me, but like I tracing something.
Wow, he's holding your hand.
Right, maybe.
Amazing. Why do you think, it's obvious, but say it out loud, why is it so important to tell his story? You know, you share his story in different places, and we're sharing his story now. Why is it so important to tell his story?
Right. Actually, not only my grandfather helped, and for example, most of the refugees, they took the railway from the Moscow to Vladivostok, and from Vladivostok to Kobe, they take the boat.
Okay.
And then, because so many number of the people start arriving to the Kobe, I mean the Tsuruga, Japanese port, Tsuruga.
Okay.
So the government ordered to consulate at Vladivostok, don't take them on the boat.
Wow.
So, but the consulate, Japanese consulate at the Vladivostok negotiate with his government because refugees has official visas.
Right.
This must be respect.
Wow.
So this man negotiate 5 times to his government to get permission. And then he studied same institute where my grandfather studied same times. Same time. So he remembers the principles.
That's amazing.
Oof.
Those 3 principles, remember?
Yeah. Yeah. What are our 3 principles? Do it yourself. Don't rely on others. Help others. Don't take credit.
Right.
Amazing. Wow. Right. And that reminds us, there's one piece of the story which is, those in positions. We often think of government as a lot of bureaucracy, and actually people in those positions have the opportunity to change the world, and also recognizing that it wasn't him alone, right? That he did his part, but there are other pieces along the way, right? He did the visas, but they had to happen.
Right.
Beautiful.
But, okay, without my grandfather, this story never. But after that, and your grandfather was in Japan 1 year, right?
Right.
Because he issued a transit visa, work only 10 days.
Right.
1 year, how come?
Right.
Yeah.
And then there was a Japanese gentleman negotiate with the city hall at the Kobe
Yeah.
to expand, to stay. 1 year is impossible.
Wow.
But it's within 10 days, difficult to find the final destinations.
Right.
Amazing.
And so someone helped there also.
Help them. Yeah, we help them.
Amazing. Amazing.
Especially they travel for 3 weeks railway, and after that, they never take shower.
Yeah.
And then people, they give the free shower.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the free accommodations, food.
Wow. Wow. Avram, I'll turn to you. I'll ask you 2 questions. One, if there's anything that you want to share with Sugihara while we're here. Let's start with that. Not to put pressure on you, but I want to give you the opportunity as well.
No, I'm humbled. Katonti mikola chasadim, right? The Torah says. I feel humbled by the loving kindnesses, by the kindnesses expressed by your grandfather that have allowed my family to live. That in and of itself is rare, is a rarity. Then to encounter, descendant of that very man who's also committed to sharing the story of his grandfather and the ideals and values that animated his grandfather's choice. I feel remarkably, humbled and grateful to you for bringing us together.
Beautiful. And I'll ask you one more. I know you have dedicated your time not to only preserving and continuing Yiddish culture, but thinking about the Holocaust and Shoah and how we ritualize that and how we think about that on an ongoing basis. As you think looking forward, carrying your family's personal story and this experience, but also carrying the pieces. I know you're passionate about remembering the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the role that Jews played to defend themselves as well. What do you think is the message around the Holocaust and the Shoah? What is one? Of course, there's a million messages, but what's on your heart right now?
Right now I'm hoping that there are some producers and screenwriters who are watching your program, because the Sugihara story is clearly a film. But I just think that there are so many stories, in the same way that we were mentioned that we were called that Mishnah of every human being enigmatic of a world, and so too everyone a story. And we often talk about how important it is to hear the voice of survivors, to hear their stories in their own words. We're lucky to be connected to those stories and feel a similar type of achrayus, responsibility in giving it over. But to uncover, to keep learning those stories. Here we are, how many years after the war? We feel like, anti-Semitism on the rise, Holocaust denialism is on the rise, and yet there's so much that we don't know about that precious period of history and the remarkable humanity that was shown during that time too.
Beautiful. I'll give myself the last word selfishly and just say that, as I mentioned, I'm so deeply affected by the fact that I'm alive because of Oskar Schindler, but I also am a person who believes that every moment we have choices. Every moment we have choices that change history forever. And the choices that your grandfather made have ripple effects in your own life, in Avram's life, but also in my life. I wouldn't have Avram in my life, right? Mm-hmm. If not for what your grandfather did for Avram's grandfather and great uncle Avram. And I encountered him in yeshiva. We become lifelong friends. We sit and study Torah together on a weekly basis. And that all comes from the memoir that the piece of the memoir you just read, that he had this moment where he felt the weight of everything he had been taught and raised, loyalty and honor and Japan and the importance of the human life in front of him and recognizing what's the right thing to do and him doing the right thing. And it's forever. It's literally forever. It affects us. It's going to affect forever. And I hope that us having this conversation is one small way to honor your grandfather and your family, and also the legacy of your grandfather, one of the many thousands of families, many thousands these days that are shaped, and it just gives you one taste of it, and there are thousands more. And I just want to thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבצע